In this video, I will be going over how to play one of the upcoming Homeland factions, the Twilight Council. I will be using the most recent print and play as of July 7th, which is likely to be the final one. I have played some games as and against the Twilight Council, so I will also be going over some basic strategy with them that I have learned throughout those games. I want to go over first what the bats are trying to do at a high level, which is basically trying to protect other factions' cardboard. The bats introduce a super unique playstyle where they are really the first faction that is incentivized to not destroy buildings and tokens. This adds a new twist to the idea of policing, whereas before, you want to destroy the buildings and tokens of the faction that is winning to get yourself points and to damage their engine. With the bats, you should instead maybe look at defending a faction's cardboard who is behind. Sure, you could defend a duchy market so that you can score an extra point every turn, but if the duchy is in the lead and the only way to slow them down is for them to pay the price of failure, maybe it's not worth it to defend that market. So this, I think, is sort of the mindset that you should go into with your bats games. Now about how to do these actions. Okay, so you have these assemblies that have two sides to them, governing and closed. You start the game with a governing assembly, assuming you're playing with AdSet. It is important to remember that while a clearing has an assembly on its governing side, whether you rule the clearing or not, enemies cannot craft with, flip, place, or remove pieces outside of battle in the clearing at all, unless if they entreat. Some examples of how this would apply to other factions, and this might not be the entire list of scenarios, but it's probably most of them. Eerie when they're trying to build roosts, Woodland Alliance when they're trying to revolt, organize, or spread sympathy, Cats producing wood, recruiting, building, Lizards converting, sanctifying, building, recruiting, Riverfolk placing a trade post or recruiting, Crows recruiting, placing, and flipping plots, Moles tunneling or building. And note, this is moles tunneling when they're tunneling for the first time. If you're moving between two tunnels, then that's a move action, and so you will not have to entreat in order to move into a clearing you already have a tunnel in. For the Badgers, that's recruiting, encamping, decamping, delving, and recovering. Interestingly, with delving, a governed clearing does not allow you to remove or place things outside of battle, but delving happens after the battle. So delving still applies, and you would have to entreat if you want to place that relic from the forest into a governed clearing. For the rats, that's building, recruiting, anointing, and raising, interestingly enough. And so it's important to pay attention to what the other players are doing on their turn to make sure you're getting the most entreating opportunities possible. Now, what is entreating exactly? And so entreating is something that everyone else can do on their turn, where they just kindly ask you to flip one of your assemblies that is governing to closed, and you have to do it. Keep in mind the enemy does not need a piece in the clearing to entreat an assembly there. Also, as far as I know, entreating is the only action that can be done in between compound actions. For example, if the warlord rolls the mob die, the result is Fox, and the only Fox clearing is a governed clearing. The Rats player can entreat after rolling the die and before placing the mob. Whenever someone entreats, you either gain a loyalist from your supply or place any amount of loyalists into the entreated clearing. This is the main reason that you want to try to position your assemblies that encourage entreating, because this is going to be your main supply of loyalists, and the more loyalists you have, the easier it will be for you to score points. Finally, the last thing that will be relevant to your enemies in clearings with assemblies is peacekeepers. This applies to assemblies that are on their governing or closed side. If two enemies are battling in a clearing with an assembly, you will add your warriors to the defenders, and they take hits after the defenders' warriors have taken hits. This means if you have an assembly in a clearing with a single sympathy token, and you have two warriors there, those warriors will protect the sympathy token from attackers. If someone comes in and rolls a 2-0, your warriors die, but the sympathy is protected. The sympathy remains there. Now onto actions. Similar to the Duchy or the Lizard Cult, you will be revealing cards to take actions. What's really unique about this, though, is that the cards you reveal during Birdsong will also have effects at assemblies during evening. So for each card, you're getting two actions in a clearing of that suit. The evening action will have to have an assembly. So, during Birdsong, you will reveal cards to do the following actions. Usually you want to look for a clearing with a token or building that you can start to get a foothold in. I find it somewhat uncommon for the bats to be taking move and battle actions with these cards, as you will be trying to set up as many assemblies as possible with some defenders. And generally, you don't want to be destroying the buildings and tokens that you're trying to actually protect to score more consistent points with. So battling isn't that common, but you might do it once or twice a game. I will point out here that I think it's important to keep one bird card from your starting hand if possible, because it's something that we can do with it during evening, and not to mention the flexibility of being able to do your Birdsong actions in any clearing. Keeping in mind with the battle and assemble actions, you may have to discard the revealed card, meaning you won't get to use it during evening. And so an interesting thing to note with assemble is that if you don't rule the clearing when you assemble, but you bring enough loyalists with it to rule afterwards, you do not discard the card. So trying to maintain your cards, as many cards as you can, is definitely going to be one of the goals with sort of the puzzle that your Birdsong is. Trying to get those assemblies down in clearings with enemy buildings and tokens without spending too many cards. So next, during daylight, thematically you will sleep, which makes sense, you're bats, waiting to continue your quest for peace at evening. At this point, you flip all assemblies you do not rule to closed. Now, during evening, we revisit the cards that you revealed during Birdsong and did not discard. If it's a suited card, you will either banish or agitate. If it's a bird card, you will empower. Let's cover empower first. When you empower, you first choose a clearing with an assembly. Then roll a die, and remove warriors equal to the number on the die. You can then either score 1 point if you rule that clearing, or move the removed warriors to become loyalists. This is a great thing to do in your starting clearing on turn 1, since your homeland doesn't have any enemy buildings or tokens you can benefit from. And with 4 warriors there, it's unlikely that someone's going to have rule to come in and place something. You can either score an easy point, or if you roll high, a high number, you can use the loyalists to reposition your assembly somewhere better. So either way, it's kind of a win-win. So I would definitely recommend empowering your starting clearing as many times as you can, and then once it's down to just the assembly, you can just move it elsewhere. Next, we'll be talking about banishing. Your goal as the bats is to either rule governing clearings with enemy buildings and tokens, or to agitate a governing clearing with a building or token that you don't rule. Banishing is a battle action where you take no rolled hits, and all hits you deal instead move warriors. The all hits you deal is an important distinction from rolled hits. This means if you deal +1 hit with a Partisans card, that extra hit can still only be used to move a warrior. You cannot destroy warriors with the banish action. If you roll 3-2 and there were only 2 warriors, you do not destroy the building or token, because it says you can only move warriors. This also means that if an opponent plays an ambush, the hits are not rolled hits, so you still lose 2 warriors, because it specifies you do not take rolled hits. This is your way of maintaining rule over others. Let's say you have an assembly in a clearing with a garden, however. Since gardens always have rule, banishing the lizard folk seems kind of useless. And so that's where agitating comes in. Agitating lets you flip the assembly to governing regardless of rule, and you get to gain a loyalist. The downside is it's very expensive, since you not only discard the card, but you will also be flipping the assembly back to closed during your next daylight anyways. If your card draw is good, however, that can certainly mitigate these downsides. An agitate strategy could be the best one, especially against the lizard folk, which we'll talk more about later during the strategy portion. Finally, after convening the wood folk, you will have the opportunity to craft. Interestingly, if you craft, you are giving up extra card draw from your assemblies. Crafting is an interesting balance since it's very easy to do, but the more you do it and the more card poor you will become, and therefore the fewer actions you can take. If you have 5 cards, crafting 1 card is somewhat free, since you will still draw 1 card at the end of evening, no matter what. So this is usually the best scenario to craft. Otherwise, you can hoard craftables, so you can craft your whole hand on your winning turn. So it doesn't matter as much that you'll start your next turn with only one card if you've already won. Next is Adjourn. This is when you flip assemblies you rule to governing, and you have the option to remove assemblies. Sometimes you may place an assembly just to draw an extra card or craft with it, so this is a good way to get rid of it so it's no longer an easy point for an opponent. Finally, you get to score points for clearings that you're governing over enemy buildings and tokens. This is everything that you've worked towards doing throughout the rest of your turn. And so that's how the bats are played. And so next I will go over some strategy that I have noticed from my couple of games with them. And so take what I say with a grain of salt, since I have played only a handful of games, and there are still some minor changes, and there still may be some minor changes before they are released. Alright, so the first thing I notice is that having at least one bird card in your starting hand is very useful, so you can empower your homeland clearing on turn 1. If you can't empower your homeland clearing on turn 1, then it sort of just feels like a worse first turn, especially if you're going like first or early in the turn order, you haven't gotten to like see where your opponents are placing their buildings and tokens at, and so this sort of gives you something to do on turn 1. If you can have 2 bird cards, then that's probably all the better, since then you can empower your homeland clearing twice. Whether you have to move a lot of warriors that become loyalists, or you get to score some points, either way it is beneficial. Next, so there are I want to talk about scoring, and so there's sort of 3 main routes that you're going to be taking for scoring as the bats. The first I was just talking about, and that's empowering. And so if you're playing on a board with extremely limited buildings and tokens, it may be worth your time to try to hoard bird cards and stack warriors in a single clearing, empowering there multiple times a turn. This definitely isn't as efficient, I think, as the other routes of getting points of defending buildings and cardboard. But if the opportunity arises and let's say the faction matchup is something like you're playing against Small Mole who's not building at all and just placing tunnels, and the rats, you could still definitely benefit from like a couple tunnels here and there, and maybe some rat strongholds, but those are both factions that it's probably going to be hard to govern more than a couple clearings of. So you might want to take more of a focus on empowering. The rats in particular have a very interesting relationship with the bats that I will talk about later. The other strategy is the main one that you'll be implementing most of the time. Find a building or token that is protected by only like 0 to 2 warriors, the fewer the better. Recruit there, place an assembly, bring loyalists, accumulate warriors from any time your enemy needs to entreat. Ideally you're doing this in a clearing that is their crafting pieces, or maybe it's like the way that you recruit, it's a stronghold for the rats, or a recruiter for the cats, and anytime they try to take back rule, you can just banish their warriors to another clearing. And so this is what I'll call the banishing strategy, maintaining rule and just scoring a lot of passive points every turn. Trying to do this in clearings that maybe your enemies don't care as much about ruling. The last way is very specific to playing against specific factions, and it's very hard for when it's very hard or impossible to maintain rule. So once again, first is the empowering way to score points, the second one is the maintaining rule to score points, and this third way is when you can't maintain rule. And so this is the agitate strategy as well, where you maintain high card draw, maybe supplemented by a craftable card that lets you draw cards, and you spend your cards to flip assemblies to governing, utilizing the loyalists to score from clearings that you have a chance at ruling. So this is of course still supplemented by the second strategy, where you still maybe want to try to rule whatever clearings you can, but this is probably common against games like I mentioned before, like with Lizard Folk, where the only way to score off of Lizard Gardens is to agitate. So I say this being the only way to score points off the lizards, like I said, but also useful against factions like the moles, where if they are building, they're going to probably be building in a clearing that's protected by like 10 moles. And so you could try to banish 10 moles, but it's probably going to be more difficult to do. and then it might just be worth it just to spend the 1 card to agitate for the turn. The agitate strat could also be good against playing against the cats, maybe, if you're trying to govern a sawmill. Because if you're ruling over a sawmill, then the cats will care a lot more about that, since the cats themselves need rule in order to utilize their wood. And so you really have to think about your opponent and what they are doing with this building or token. Do they care if I rule that clearing? Will my warriors defending their buildings and tokens be enough of a benefit for them to leave me alone? If the answer is no, they need rule, and they will probably try to kick me out if I maintain rule, then maybe you try to agitate there instead. Yeah, so like with the cats, it might not be worth it to annoy them to the point where they will come and battle you. Finally, I want to talk about the rats. When I first played a game where someone was the bats, the whole time I was thinking about this matchup. As you have the warlord of the woodland going against the council that just wants peace. The next game, when I played the bats, I got to experience this matchup, and honestly, it wasn't as bad for the bats as I expected. Your Peacekeeper's ability, defending other people's things, slows down the rats considerably, since they often rely on cardboard to supplement their slow scoring. But with Peacekeepers, adding to the defenders for easy cardboard, that just also means more battle actions the rats need to take, and more losses that they're usually taking. Mobs have an interesting interaction with assemblies, where they are removing the assembly outside of battle, so the rats player has to entreat in order to raise these clearings. So even if you get raised, you're going to at least get a loyalist out of it. However, in order to oppress the rats, the rats do not like you defending their buildings. If the rats are trying to oppress, they're probably going to try to kick you out of the clearings that you're trying to govern with their strongholds. So you often tend to be a protector of the other factions against the rats in games with them. Sometimes maybe just ignoring them entirely and trying to defend everyone else against them, which I think is thematically very cool, and is sort of like how I would want the bats-rats matchup to be. And so another thing I want to mention is banishing with them. Banishing is strangely very strong against the rats too. If the warlord is being protected by like 8 warriors and you have several matching cards to banish, you almost always have a budget false orders that you can use to separate the warlord, either taxing their actions as they try to regroup their stack, or working with the rest of the table to kill the warlord after all the protectors have been banished. In the game I played, there was also the lizards involved, and so I found it very interesting to try to banish rat warriors into clearings with gardens, so that they wouldn't have rule, making it even more difficult for them to consolidate. And so that's how to play the Twilight Council, and some strategy I've learned from my few games with them. Once again, take this video with a grain of salt, and I may make a new one once they are officially out, and I have more experience with them. But I hope this video was at least interesting anyways. Thank you for watching, and have a good day, everyone.